Morning, good afternoon, good evening. Zimbabwe is a failed state. This is the reality that we have got to deal with. We are now a laughing stock of the world. We are not going to get out of this hole without clearly defining what went wrong. And a good place to start, I believe, is to understand why we fail to govern ourselves. There are three basic types of human beings on earth. We do not have to do any research to find that out. That has already been well established. We are living in a civilized world, 21st century. Those realities have been well established and well documented. And one of the first people to actually document it were the ancient Greeks. They defined the three types of human beings as idiots, tribesmen, and the citizen. I would like you to listen to this explanation of those three types of human beings. We do not need to reinvent the wheel. We only need to apply it. And so let's have a definition of what the three types of human beings are.
That there are always three kinds of people in any given society. This threefold distinction has been noted and made by notable sociologists and public intellectuals. But this threefold distinction of the three kinds of people, it was first identified and first stated by the supporters and founders of democracy in ancient Greece. For the Greek people, the people who in many ways gave us the modern civilized world, for the Greek people, the first kind of people in any given society are the idiots. For the Greeks, the idiot is not necessarily someone who is mentally deficient. Rather, for ancient Greek people, the idiot, they said, is someone who is a totally private person, a totally self-centered person, and a totally selfish person. They called him the idiot. The idiot, he is always out for his personal gain and his personal interests. He does not have a public philosophy. He has no knowledge, no skill, no character, and no virtues to be able to live and to be able to contribute in a flourishing society and community. He's all out for his personal pleasures and for his personal treasures. And the Greeks said that the idiot was just an upgraded barbarian. The first kind of person, the idiot. But the Greeks also said that there is a second kind of people in any given society. And the Greeks called these people the tribes people. When we say tribes people, we don't necessarily mean the fact of belonging to a certain tribe, which is a good thing. But when they use the word tribes people, the Greeks meant a tribal and a tribalistic mentality. And the Greeks said that tribes people are those people who are not able to think beyond their small tribe or their small groups. For tribes people, their primary allegiance, their only allegiance, and their ultimate allegiance is to their tribe. Their tribe is their God, and their religion is tribalism. And tribes people, the Greeks said, are always afraid of things that are different, that are a little alien to them. They are always suspicious and fearful. And they always dealt with different people and difficult situations with intimidation, with force, and with violence. And the Greeks also said that the ideal person for tribes people is the warrior, because tribes people are a war-making people. Their ideal is the warrior. But it was not so for the Greeks. For the Greeks, there was another kind of people, another kind of a person, and that was the ideal person. And the Greeks called this ideal person the citizen. The citizen. And here when we use the word citizen, we are not talking about legal status or political status. We are talking about the idea and the ideal of citizenship. And who is the citizen? The citizen, according to the Greeks, is someone who has the skills and the knowledge to live a public life, who is able to live a life of civility. The citizen recognizes that he or she is a member of a commonwealth and thus strives for the common good. That is the citizen. The citizen, yes, he or she knows his or her rights in a society, but he or she also knows his or her responsibilities to society. The citizen can fight for his rights, but always with an awareness of and with a respect for the rights and interests of others, of their neighbors, of the smallest of minorities, and of the worst of their enemies. And it is citizens, the Greeks said, that make up a civilized society. Because
there we have it. I think it's a really good definition. When you try to apply it in the case of Zimbabwe, that's when you realize why Zimbabwe is in a political mess. Ever since, go back to our struggle for independence, the ZANU-PF leaders, they claimed that they were fighting for one man, one vote, the rights and freedoms of all Zimbabweans. But that was not true. They were only paying lip service to those things. What they were fighting for is for them to replace the white regime and become the new lords. ZANU-PF had the opportunity to make sure that we have free, fair, and credible elections. The 1980 elections were not free, fair, and credible. ZANU-PF realized that they may lose these elections, and so they immediately changed the goalposts and said, well, if we lose the elections, the Bush war would continue. Yes, people may argue that, yes, they may have had good reason to suspect that the white colonial regime will chip them. We'll see to it that ZANU-PF loses the elections. Even if we accept that, that is because they didn't trust the British to run a free, fair, and credible election. Let's give them the benefit of that doubt. What about what happened later on? 3 years after independence, ZANU-PF launched the Kukurawundi. No one in their right mind can ever deny that the primary purpose of the Kukurawundi was to coerce PF SAPU to give up the ambition to be an independent political party and to contest elections with a view of winning them. ZANU-PF was worried that if their performance during the first 5 years was not good enough, and they kept their promise to hold free, fair, and credible elections, PF SAPU may win it. And why not? So the only way to make sure that PF SAPU does not win the elections and they stay in power was to coerce PF SAPU to give up being an independent political party. And what other better way to do it than to launch a war against PF SAPU leaders and their supporters? In 1987, PF SAPU threw in the towel, signed the Unity Accord, and that paved the way for ZANU-PF to impose a de facto one-party state. Elections thereafter, ZANU-PF rigged them. And their excuse was that anyone, the opposition, challenging them for power, were threatening the peace. They labeled the opposition puppets of the West. ZANU-PF's mentality was not to create citizen, as the Greeks would define it. They wanted their supporters to remain tribesmen who supported ZANU-PF no matter what. The Greeks realized that those three distinct classes of people, and they made a concerted effort to move the idiots and the tribesmen to become functional citizens. Their commitment was to educate them. There was freedom of expression, free media, and a commitment to that everyone has the right to have a meaningful role in society. Our problem is we've had these tribesmen, and the tribesman, like he correctly defined it there, has got only commitment to the tribe. That's his religion. Robert Mugabe literally twisted those ZANU-PF war veterans into believing that ZANU-PF was the only party fit to govern the country. And they are part of the tribe. the ZANU-PF tribe. So supporting ZANU-PF was considered to be paramount. The good of the nation, the Commonwealth, was subjected to the good of ZANU-PF. ZANU-PF became more important than the nation. And so saving ZANU-PF was considered to be more important than saving the country. During the fight to end British rule in India, Mahatma Gandhi and his fellow Indian leaders faced the same dilemma as we faced in Zimbabwe. Should they have an armed struggle to end British rule of India? In the end, they decided no, because they asked themselves the fundamental question: what kind of leaders would an armed struggle throw up? The rhetorical question. And as he clearly defined there, the tribesman's mentality is the war. That's the ideal tribesman. If you don't get what you want, use violence, intimidate, threat, arm twist, kill to get what you want. That's the mentality of the tribesman. And so by agreeing to end British rule by using violence, they will be necessarily promoting the tribesmen, those with the tribal mentality. If you don't get what you want, use violence. And the question is, would those people be the people who would want to lead independent India? I think in Zimbabwe we have heard the answer to that question. We accepted the need for an armed struggle, but unfortunately threw up the kind of leaders who, as the country was getting on to ending white colonial rule, realized that they may lose power. And so their focus shifted from ending white colonial rule to making sure that they get into power. And so they tamed the AK-47 rifle to the people, telling the people that if ZANU-PF does not win the election in 1980, the Bush War would continue. The message was very clear. If we don't get power, we'll fight for it. And even if it means fighting you, the people who would have voted for somebody else to get into power. In 1983, when the regime realized that if they are going to allow PF-SAPU to exist as a political party, that was their biggest challenge. Their hold on power was threatened by the presence of PF-SAPU. And so the Kukurahundi massacre was the answer. Violence, we must beat them into submission, accept to join ZANU-PF. And that has always been ZANU-PF's answer. And unfortunately, most of the freedom fighters who believed, and I believe that many of them joined the war genuinely believing that they were fighting for freedom, dignity for all Zimbabweans. But as soon as they got into power, the ZANU-PF started feeding them the tribal mentality that their main commitment was to ZANU-PF. And what better way to underline that than by labeling anybody else in the opposition as a puppet of the West. We are protecting the sovereignty of the country became the rallying call. And denying people their fundamental right to a meaningful say in the governance of the country was justified in that we are protecting the sovereignty and the independence of the country. These people, if we grant them the right to a meaningful vote, they will vote a puppet into power, will threaten the sovereignty of the country, the independence of the country. That has been always the underlying call by ZANU-PF. It's shocking that even today, with all the benefit of hindsight, there are ZANU-PF hardcore supporters out there who believe that the opposition are puppets of the West, who must be kept out of power at all costs. So they paid lip service to the issue of every Zimbabwean has a right to a meaningful vote. And the government, whoever emerges to govern the country, must get their mandate from the people of Zimbabwe in a free, fair, and credible election. To try to reason with those people has been impossible because they've got the tribal mentality. They believe that granting the ordinary person the right to a meaningful vote undermines their God, the tribe, ZANU-PF's position. They will justify everything that ZANU-PF has done in the name of maintaining ZANU-PF's supremacy. The opposition has never been accused in a court of law and found guilty of being a puppet of the West. Never. And yet that has been applied in Zimbabwe these last 44 years as if that has been proven. The contrast between ZANU-PF and ANC in South Africa, for instance, could not be more graphically illustrated than by looking at ANC. ANC, before the country became independent, had the Freedom Charter, in which the party committed itself to granting every South African the basic freedoms and human rights that we are talking about here, including the right to a meaningful vote. This is why South Africa these last 30 years, they've managed to hold free, fair, and credible elections because they've believed those as fundamental rights. The tribal mentality was not what the ANC wanted. The other problem we have had in Zimbabwe is that when the opposition MDC emerged, they failed to promote the citizen mentality. They too wanted to rely on the tribal mentality. MDC, Triple C have been on the political stage the last 23 years. And we have had core supporters in that party who really find it unacceptable that you can criticize the MDC leadership. Because they think in the tribal mentality, the party has become their new god. And the party leader has become a demigod who is incapable of committing any mistakes. And for them, even if they acknowledge that, yes, the leaders have failed, but you're more faithful to the party because of their faith to the party, they only see it as it's their party versus ZANU-PF. And the choice to them is very clear. They have got to support their party and their leader. They could never emerge out of that mentality to look at what is good for the country. What is good for the country, of course, in this particular case, is that MDC leaders should implement the democratic reforms as they promised to do to stop ZANU-PF rigging the elections. It is good for the country that now that we can see they failed to do so, we elect other opposition leaders to implement those reforms. But when you've got the tribal mentality, when the party becomes your god, your temple, your religion, you're stuck with MDC, Triple C. Soon after independence, the level of tribal commitment to ZANU-PF was such that to criticize Robert Mugabe was considered to be sacrilege. You risked being beaten up because Mugabe was untouchable. It took nearly 20 years for people to finally accept that Mugabe was a tyrant, a murderous tyrant at that. And yet, the same blind loyalty was transferred from Robert Mugabe to initially Morgan Tsvangirai and now Nelson Chamisa. To say that Nelson Chamisa is sold out, even if you give a mountain of evidence to show it, is unacceptable to some people. This is a God. How could a God make a mistake? And in their mentality, they are always looking at, we have got to, either you belong to ZANU-PF or you belong to MDC. And if you belong to MDC, anything that the party has done wrong can be forgiven. And you stick with the party. Is that in the interest of the country? Of course not. Just as much as sticking with ZANU-PF. Is that in the interest of the country? Of course not. But these are people with the tribal mentality. I think the main problem with Zimbabwe, why we are a failed state, is that we, the people, They fail to appreciate those three distinct groups of people. And it is important that the people themselves appreciate that distinction and they can start aspiring to become citizens. Because as long as they remain idiots or tribespeople, we have got politicians there who have made it their career to exploit that weakness. To keep themselves in power. There's no doubt that ZANU-PF, when it turned to the war veterans, for instance, in the late 1990s, and bribed them with the $50,000 payoffs, it was just buying the blind loyalty of the war veterans. And they fell for it. Even if you've been paid off that payoff, there was absolutely no reason why you, as an individual, should support a situation where ZANU-PF was rigging the elections. But supporting ZANU-PF, they did. In the 2008, during the Operation Mavotera Papi, ZANU-PF thugs, war veterans, were the foot soldiers for ZANU-PF. Yes, the more heavier load of the wanton violence was carried by the army, the police, the CIO, and the prison services. But the foot soldiers were the war veterans. They'd been brainwashed into believing that the opposition, if they were elected, they would compromise the country's sovereignty and independence. That, of course, was nonsense. We can't have it both ways. If we are serious about making sure that every Zimbabwean has got the basic fundamental rights, we have got to accept that those people, they can make a mistake. They can vote for somebody who is incompetent. But that is part of the democratic system. And those in power should not try to secure their position by turning everybody, by denying the fundamental rights of all the citizens to create this tribal-based political system. And right now, what is also blocking progress is the tribal mentality of the opposition. Let's say there's no doubt that the majority of Zimbabweans participated in the 2023 elections because they believed Chamisa when he claimed that Triple C was going to win, and he had plugged all the voting loopholes. Of course, that was nonsense. But when you've got the tribal mentality, you do not think of such things. What was in the good of the country was that the elections should be free, fair, and credible. What was in the good of Triple C was that the party should participate in those flawed elections no matter what, because they were going to get the few gravy train seats and stay as the country's main opposition. We do not have to reinvent the wheel. We only have to apply it. Identifying the three distinct classes of Zimbabweans out there is important. It's at the heart of our effort to build a healthy and functioning democracy. We should shun those who behave like idiots. We should shun those who behave in a tribal mentality. We want a Zimbabwe that is a healthy and functioning democracy. We have to work for it. And we have got to be clear what kind of citizen we want. Universal suffrage is all very well. But when you're going to give the vote to an idiot, you're not doing yourself any favors. When you're going to give the vote to a tribal, somebody with a tribal mentality, you're not doing yourself any favors either. Because those people will never vote, make a democratic choice. They will never vote for what is good for the country. They only vote for what is good for the tribe or they themselves individually. But our first step is to accept those three classes and to commit ourselves to educating everybody so that they understand what the three distinct classes are and why they should aspire to be a citizen, to look at the bigger picture and not always focus at their own individual selfish interests. Because the political leaders out there know those weaknesses and they are only there to exploit them. They don't care about what is good for the country. They only care about what is good for them. We can have a healthy and functioning democracy, but we have to work for it. We have got to understand what it is that contributes towards creating a healthy and functioning democratic society and work towards that. Thank you very much for listening and good night.